U.S. ethanol production rose last week to its highest mark in nearly 2 months. But ethanol plants still face the challenge of purchasing expensive corn after the drought burned crops over the summer. Cattle feeders buying a byproduct like distillers grains now meet a price nearly equal to corn. We talked with Terry Klopfenstein on East Campus this week about how producers can best optimize their use of byproducts when supplies are this tight.
When the ethanol industry started growing, the use of especially the wet byproducts in Nebraska really fit because you save drying cost. We've got at least one plant in the state doesn't have a dryer that didn't need to make the investment, so that this is good for the cattle. The good news is the wet product is even better than dry, so it's kind of win-win. Ethanol plant can produce it less expensively, and it's better feed for the cattle. But there wasn't really a market for it. We were doing research and we were encouraging, but it took some time for it to develop. So they sold it at quite a discount to corn, probably in the 60 to 70% the price of corn.
And unfortunately this year it's starting to catch up to that price of corn.
And as the ethanol industry really developed, that moved to probably, 70 to 90%, around 80% the price of corn for 4 or 5 years. But this year, when the drought appeared, price of corn went up, then there was more demand for distillers to replace expensive corn. That increased the demand for the distillers, so the price went up. So pretty much this summer, it's tracked at about 100% the price of corn.
Now, are you worried about the supply of dry distillers grains going forward? This is what you're looking at, correct? If there's
and you said dry distillers, I call it distillers.
Sure.
Because we're
wet
mostly interested in the wet, okay?
Okay.
Erickson says wetter is better, okay? So from the cattle industry, that's the way we view it. That's right. I'm just guessing that we would normally produce about 6 million tons on a dry basis. Sure. This year it's probably going to be more in that 5 million tons basis, maybe 80%, something like that, with some plants idled at the present time. But if we use it judiciously, I think that can go around. In fact, that's our goal. How do we kind of optimize use now rather than maximize? Because we had plenty of it the last 4 or 5 years, and so we were encouraging ways to use more and more of the distillers grains. This year we got to think about how do we ration it.
How do you? I mean, what's the suggestion you give to farmers or consultants?
First off, the first 20 to 25% that we add to a feedlot diet is supplying protein as well as energy. That's replacing another protein source or replacing urea in the diet. And urea is expensive, so that helps economically. Above that, then, it's just energy replacing corn. So we're looking more now at this area down between 25 and 35 rather than 35 to 40. And if we do that, then we can handle that decreased supply of distillers grains.
Right. My interpretation is you're not looking at necessarily trying to fix a short-term cost here. You're more so looking at trying to maintain a supply in the long term. Is that correct?
Well, it's all about basic economics of supply and demand, right? And so we've got to deal with decreased supply this year and increased demand. Okay, so how do we best ration this distillers for this year? Long term, we may be looking more at some maximal levels rather than optimal. But for this year, I think we're looking at optimal.
Hopefully corn lasts, so right? Hopefully there's enough corn to go around that it doesn't get so expensive here in a few months.
Well, this is the problem. That if we reduce let's say we reduce the amount of distillers we're feeding by 10% of the diet. That means we've got to fill that 10% up with something.
Right.
If we fill it up with corn, that increases corn demand, the price of corn goes up, and the distillers that we're trying to ration also goes up because it's tied to corn, doesn't help us. Okay, so an important part is filling that 10% or more with something else. And we've got two two possibilities. It's basically using the residue part of the corn plant. And one is the calcium oxide treatment of the residue that is really becoming fairly popular. And the second one is the use of more corn silage, because that way you're harvesting the residue right with the corn. And a lot of that was harvested this year, partially because of the drought and some dryland corn that wasn't going to make much corn, but it made silage. But we also had the meeting in June, kind of seeing this coming, where we were really encouraging more corn silage harvest. I have a sense that more of that was done. So if we can replace that, obviously we're not replacing the corn in corn silage by feeding corn silage, but that residue could replace that 10% of distillers we're not feeding, rather than the corn. So it's a lot of things going together trying to accomplish this.